So, hello everyone, this is Ari, and today I'd like to go over the process of how to become a two-dimensional VTuber, which is a VTuber who uses a two-dimensional piece of art. I've been a VTuber for about 2 years now, and for most of that time I've been using a 3D model, although I have experimented with both using 3D and 2D. And yeah, I drew this picture here entirely by myself, rigged it myself, animated it, and I'd like to go over the steps to do all of this in a quick step-by-step process. I've made a written version of this, although it is still following a quick step-by-step format like this picture you see here. And I'll try to go over the same thing here in video form, but well, it's been a while since I've done a video recorded lecture or something like this, so hopefully there won't be that too many goofs. Too many goofs. Jeez, that's one. That's number one on the list now, on the tally. The general idea, though, is the same no matter where you begin, and the idea is that you take a piece of art, you put it into a program called Live 2D, which allows you to take a single piece of art and make it animated, like what you see for me on the left here. And then you load it into a program that has facial capture to interpret that into like real-time movement. This Live 2D technology was made about 10 years ago, and it was originally made for visual novels and stuff like that, those kinds of video games. But this really became popular for VTubers a couple of years ago, where instead of animating it, and instead of animating it beforehand, they just attach it to a face capture with your webcam or something to make it or do it in real time. The step-by-step process for this is fairly simple, but ideally you would be aware of some basic principles of 2D animation and 3D animation beforehand, because the way that Live 2D does this is rather unique, and it allows it to have a fairly streamlined workflow. Essentially, you need to build the image similarly to 2D animation, but then when you put it into the program to animate it, it actually follows 3D principles, and as a result, you don't need to make frames or anything like that. You just take that one picture and you kind of deform it and warp it and all that. So if you're familiar with basic ideas of meshes and UV mapping for the 3D side, and if you're familiar with art software and putting it into layers on the 2D side, and assembling an image with layers, then you should have all of the ideas in place to do this. And this picture here is the completed picture that I have. I enhanced it with a bit of shading and stuff like that, and you can already see on the right here that it's separated into layers, and you can and this is essentially the completed file which I put into Live 2D. You can see the number of layers I have here. There's like a hair component, hair on the right, hair on the left. There's the mouth that's closed. There's an image for the mouth that's open. Shadows, left and right eyebrows, eyes, irises, and so on and so forth. And just, all of the different components are here. And for some reason the preview's not showing up anymore. That's weird. Instead of taking this image, I'm just going to start drawing from scratch, just to illustrate it a bit more easily. So let's go over to this one here. The way that you make your image will vary depending on where you get your image from. If you're drawing it from scratch That's the ideal situation, because for the second step, you actually need to split this into layers. If you're commissioning a piece of art and the artist isn't really, fully aware of how it works, you're going to do you're going to need to do the cutting up yourself. There is another method that you could use where you take screenshots from like something else and then you cut it up yourself. But yeah, that method, it doesn't fully belong to you. There is one way you can take screenshots from something else, and that was in my previous tutorial, which I did originally, and that's from taking screenshots in Vtuber. So if you really don't have any art talent, you could steal anime screenshots from there, and it's actually okay. But well, ideally, the ideal situation is that you just draw it yourself, or you get a piece of art. So let's draw something rather basic here, and let's just draw like a cat face or something like that. Obviously, when you're doing a full avatar image, you would just flesh this out more and more, but the core step-by-step process is still the same. You need to draw it into a series of components. So let's just do like a cat face here. How do I do eyes? I'm not really sure how to do eyes. And then you color it in the background and stuff like that. So let's make it blue. I'm not drawing myself or anything like that, by the way. I'm not, that much of a narcissist. And I'm not saying I'm a cat, even though everyone keeps calling me a cat. Now, the program that you use to draw this, it doesn't really matter that much. But the key thing is that you need something that can export to a Photoshop file, and that's an important part of the workflow of making a live 2D model, and that's it actually the live 2D program actually supports Photoshop files. So you can draw this in whatever you want, honestly. In this case, I'm using Krita, which is a free and open source drawing program. And that's a fairly dark colored blue. And I guess I just made a Prussian blue. Yeah, that's just a cat face. This is just the beginning though, because either you need to draw this up into layers or cut it up. So I actually did this incorrectly. So let's redraw it into the core components. And as I said, there's two ways of going about this. You can cut it up, or you can just redraw the whole thing. So if I really wanted to, I could say, let's see, where's the lasso tool? I can never remember where all of these are. Here we go. So depending on how you want to get around this, and depending on what kind of where you got your piece of art from, whether you commissioned it or you made it yourself or whatever, you're going to need to slice this into layers. So you cut it into a new layer, and then you have a separate component. If you're cutting it up like this, you should probably extend it a little bit by doing a little bit of your own drawing. Since it goes under a different layer, it doesn't need to be great. So just extend that little portion, and no one will really notice that much. You could use the clone tool if you really wanted to, if you're adapting someone else's image. and then you make sure that's it on the appropriate level, and that's one component. And then you do that for the other ear as well, and the face. So let's do a quick cut up here. Cut to new layer. Trying to just extend that a little bit. The reason why it needs to be extended is because you're going to move from left to right, and for the sake of parallax, all of these need to be moved a little as well, which means that it's going to reveal just a little bit behind it. And the amount that you fill in behind it is going to affect how far left and right your avatar is going to look. If you're drawing it simply in an anime style, it's going to be plain colors, so that's pretty easy to fill in. I can't draw particularly well, so for my avatar, you see here, I was able to just take advantage of that fact that anime uses flat colors. But the tricky bit has to do with the eyes and the mouth, and hopefully you know, the person drawing this will put this into consideration, because you want eyes that blink and you want a mouth that opens and closes, and these components are probably the part that you need to do a lot more surgery on. So in this case, since I want to, say, retain these eyes, I'm going to need to crop these out rather carefully. And then carefully erase the blue around it. Especially since I didn't draw it that well. Another option is that you just draw it on a separate layer. So let's see. Let's see, I need to remember that this works differently. I need to pick the fill tool and the erase tool, and I can actually do an area erase like that. So since I painted in plain colors, I can just fill in the background, but I can just you know, fill in the back like that. So now the eyes are separate, although that's, yeah, I need to fill that into it. Don't worry, even though it's, you know, Halloween, this isn't like a nightmare, so let's just fill that in. And for the mouth, you might want to have versions with an open mouth and a closed mouth. So that's where outright having a different layer drawn would be useful. So I'm just going to outright draw another layer. So just put some opacity there. And this will just block the entire thing entirely. This is where it's similar to a 2D animation principle, where you have something on top, and that just replaces the thing entirely. So let's have an open mouth there, and color it in just with a paint bucket. That's the wrong color. Do cats have eyebrows? Let's add some eyebrows as well. So that's an eyebrow on, let's see, let's make it bright blue. And one on the right. And that's probably everything that's needed, although I could try drawing a body as well in the bottom layer there. Put that at the top. Now for this, I'm drawing a fairly significant portion under the head because, again, it's going to be exposed when the body moves up and down. So I need to actually fully draw the entire neck underneath or something like that. So I don't really know what kind of cartoon cat I'm drawing. I don't really know what cartoon cats look like, but well, I guess I really am just improvising this, aren't I? It's a very strange looking cat. Let's, just to make it a bit clear, I'm just gonna make this a different color. Yeah, it's a cat. Ideally, you should be naming all of these layers as well. So that's the right eyebrow. Call that eyebrow R. That's the mouth open. Those are the eyes. That's the face. That's the left ear. Here are. That's the body. Now, no matter how you make this, the end result in your layers needs to be nothing but layers. You can't have groups or folders, and that's for the sake of importing it into the Live2D file. So you can draw it however you want, but the important thing is that you need to separate your components into layers like these on the right. And ideally no background either, although you can just hide it. And that's specifically because you're straight up just going to put it into Live2D. And yeah, so for my drawing, which you can see here, I actually drew like 200 different layers, and it just has to do with the drawing process, right? You know, you draw outlines and then backgrounds and then shadings and highlights and so on and so forth. But when you start putting them into components, you need to merge them all together and have them in separate components like these. And that's, you know, I think this is kind of enough. So let's save this. And as I said earlier, you need to export this as a Photoshop file. It doesn't, yeah, so you can use any program you want really, as long as you can export to a Photoshop file. Using Photoshop itself, you can do that. If you want to do like vector art, you can do Illustrator, and then you need to rasterize it and put it into a Photoshop file. If you use open source software, usually they can import, export Photoshop files. But the common point is that it needs to be just layers, no groups, no folders or anything like that. So I'm just going to save that, and then let's open up Live2D. So the Live2D editor, let's just open up my web browser here. It's called Live2D Cubism. And this is where you get the editor. You just go to this website and get it. There's a trial version, but there's also a free version. The free version has some limitations, and I actually just straight up use the free version and don't care about the trial. and it mainly just has to do with the number of layers you can put in. But for the most part, being a VTuber, the free version gives you enough. This website is quite different from the past. It's actually in English, but yeah, you just download it and install it, and yeah, let's go into that. So those are essentially the first 4 steps. You make a piece of art, you put it into the correct set of layers that you want to animate, and then you export it to a Photoshop format. For Live 2D, let's start that up now. Now, if you need some help, there are some official tutorial videos here. When I was first learning it, they actually didn't finish the last set of videos, but this essentially goes over what I'm about to go over really quickly. So let's skip over that. Skip the trial, let's just do the free version. And here is where you need the Photoshop file, because that makes everything so much easier. The old way of doing it from years and years ago is that you'd make a new model file, and then you would drag in those components one by one. So you would actually need to save each of these individual components as individual, you need to save each of these layers as different image files, and then you drag them in and then you rearrange them. But since I arranged it already in this, I can straight up just drag in the Photoshop file, and it creates a project file right then and there. The key thing with doing this method as well, there are 2 key advantages. First off is that it's already laid out for you, and if you want to like update the art, you can actually just drag the Photoshop file back in, and it'll just overwrite the layers that match a name. The second advantage, it has to do with this tab here, and this is where you're going to do most of the animation setup. And if you make a project file, this section is actually blank. If you drag in a Photoshop file, it actually makes and pre-names all of these values for you beforehand for you. So this pretty much takes care of it. And that's the thing that is really helpful. So let's look over this interface here. This on the top left here is just outlining your components, all the image layers. The bottom left here, which I'm currently blocking, it looks fairly similar, but this highlights the grouping for animation. So this list of layers is just for layer hierarchy and the image files, and this list of layers is animation hierarchy, because you can actually group animations and stuff together. This here is where you have your keyframes, and they're not really called keyframes because it's not a strict animation, so they're called keyforms. And instead they're just set to different values. So you have angle X, angle Y, and you set a keyframe, or you add a keyframe by pressing these buttons here with the green dots. First off, you need to select the component, and then press this to add, and then the green dots mean that there are keyforms added. This inspector has properties for this specific component as well, and some of these properties will actually be affected by the the key form as well. Particularly draw order and opacity. There's also blend mode. Yeah, this is just the tool tab, and this here is where you move things around and actually start setting your keyforms or keyframes or whatever you want to call them. The important thing about having these set up beforehand is that this default set is what most of the Vtuber software uses. So if you do the Photoshop file method and just drag it in and assign most of these values depending on what you want, it should work on pretty much any program. I use one that's not really frequently used, but it works fine on that. I did a rig for someone else and they used a completely different program. I didn't know what program they were going to use, and then, well, I didn't even test it on that because I didn't have it, and it worked just fine. So as long as you just know what these values are and what they mean, for the most part, it should be fine. The most important ones, though, is probably just angle X and angle Y, and that's for your head. Angle Z as well as for head tilt. There's eyeball X and Y, there's eyebrows, there's angles, form, and I'll try to go over most of them. I don't actually know what that one is for, but for most of them they should be fine. So much talking. So essentially, to create a keyform, you just set the frame that you want with this slider, and then you just manipulate it, and then that creates another keyframe, keyform, whatever. So for angle X, if you slide this all to the right, ideally you should be looking to the right somehow. So all I have to do is manipulate the image on the side here, and then when I go back, it actually moves back. And if I move this to the left, move this to the left, and now there are 3 different keyframes, keyforms, whatever. I'm still weirded out by that. The word keyform is kind of unique to Live2D because of just, you know, how it works. But yeah, the whole process of making an avatar, you assign keyforms to as many as you can. Try to do a bit of a hierarchy if you need to, yeah, you compile it and put it in. The limits of the free version is that you can only set keyforms on 2 of these, but usually that's enough. This button here lets you bind it to a 2-dimensional thing, so it can go left, right, up, and down. So let's say if I wanted angle Y to look up, I can just look up, move this up a bit, then move it down. So all of a sudden I can look up, down, left, and right. The corners are their own keyframes or keyforms, so you essentially need to do 8 of these. Although if you're kind of lazy, there's a feature here called synthesize corners, so you can just press that, and it'll try to automatically generate all the corners like that. That's the gist of the keyforms, but obviously I'm just moving the picture around. And this is where some principles of 3D animation come in, because you can actually deform this way more than just that. And that has to do with all the stuff up here. These buttons here allow you to put a mesh on that particular sprite. Which is kind of the reverse of normal 3D animation. Usually you make a mesh and then you put a texture on it. In this case, you make a texture and you put a mesh on it. There's an auto button here, although you can also just make your own. You can just make your own mesh from scratch. and those are the tools to put down vertices. Confirm that, and then you can actually manipulate this mesh directly as part of the keyforms as well. Like whatever you do to manipulate on this canvas, it'll be saved in that particular keyform. Yeah, the auto generation. There's a few different auto generation methods. It's rather smart, although if you want something specific like a high density of vertices for eyes or mouths or something, you're going to need to do that yourself. But this is a great starter. You can have one with them fairly far apart, or you can have heavy deformation, which adds a lot of vertices. We'll just go with the standard one. And with that, you can manipulate these as much as you want on every keyform. This is where a lot of mental imagination is necessary, because you're trying to deform this in a way that simulates 3D, even though it's a 2D image. So ideally you do this mesh in a way that kind of looks like a 3D mesh, but except it's on a flat plane. Although there are some broad movements you can make, like just squashing one side and then stretching the other side to make it look like it's looking to the left or something like that. You can group these and add even more meshes on top. There's a warp deformer here, and also rotation deformers and art paths, or deform paths rather. And how long have I been talking for? And this lets you get over a few different limitations, and also lets you deform things in groups. So first off, let's just quickly generate meshes for every single thing. And then let's say we group the mouth, eyes, and face together. Then we click that button there, and it creates a fairly simple plane that can be grouped together. And you have a fairly simple mesh here that's just a plane, and this allows you to just deform the entire group. And since this is a separate layer as well, you can add your own set of parameters, so you can stack keyforms on top of keyforms on top of keyforms, and that allows for more complex movements, such as tilting your head and then rotating to the side and then looking up at the same time. So let's add some keyforms here. Let's actually delete that face, because I was just making that for demonstration. If I want to look to the left, it's a fairly simple mesh here. You can add more divisions, but you can deform it by just pushing that if you really wanted to. And it just deforms everything. Generating the meshes is important for every single layer. If you don't, it'll just resize it. Because you can see here that the entire thing is being deformed. So if I kind of just do a bit of a push to the center here, now it looks like it's looking to the left, roughly speaking. And if I do an identical deformation over there, just by kind of pushing everything like that, now it's kind of looking to the right. But yeah, doing the mesh doing the warp deformer here um, kind of speed things up a little. Although if you need to do minute adjustments, this is the wide brush. If you want to do minute adjustments, you should be doing it just directly on the mesh here. So let's say these eyes, that eye is being deformed a bit too much. So I could add some keyframes there and just deform this as well, and then the deformations will just stack on top of each other. And now I've got it looking left and right. For most of these other values, they affect other things, of course. So for eyebrows, ideally the eyebrow should be part of that. So here I can just stick that in, put that in there. And now that'll be included in the deformation. But here is where you should be adding your own additional. This is where having multiple layers of animations is important, because, well, maybe you want the eyebrows to move. So on this value here, there's eyebrow LY and RY and LX and RX. I don't know why there's so many. You add that. You go to the frame you want. High values is usually plus, and then low values is usually down. And you do that for that side. I don't know if it's the case for all the software, but at the very least on my Vtuber software, if I have these inverted by accident, I can actually invert it in the Vtuber program. Ideally though, you would not have that mistake. But if you can flip these around by just pressing reflect here. And it'll reverse the keyform order like that. If you need to put this on a different set of values as well, you can also just press some of these others like change or adjust. You can change the location of these keyforms to different places just by typing it in there. Or you can press change and then it'll just straight up move it to another set. So for example, if I have the left and right flipped around, or if I want this to move in conjunction with the mouth, I could just put this on, say, the mouth value. So if I really wanted to the mouth open close value, I could just have it all on the same animation parameter. And after that, it's just adding things to adding more and more deformations to create that illusion of 3D and parallax. So at the moment, this is moving to moving to the left and right, but the ears aren't moving. And this is where, and I'm just going to move these separately, not as a child of this mesh, because, well, the ears are at a different depth in 3D, so I need to do a bit of parallax. So say that moves to the left. And in this case, let's move the whole thing to the left a little. And then, depending on, how you might imagine it, again, it's the same thing. All right. And for up and down, I don't have up and down for this yet, but that's fine. let's just quickly put this together. To look up a little. You really have to imagine what it looks like, so you kind of just have to imagine the whole thing rolling. I'm not the greatest person at this, but hopefully it looks convincing. Yeah, that looks convincing enough. Probably just want to move those two in a group, so I'm just going to group them with another deformer. It's just easier sometimes. So on that frame, I'll just move the whole thing down. Or maybe not actually. Yeah, for that I'll need to do the corners. If I delete the Y angles here, because I'm doing Y with that parent, so yeah, it looks a bit weird, doesn't it? Let's just delete that. Just make it look down. And then just synthesize the corners. I'm doing this just to speed things up, honestly. But ideally you would just I think I broke something by accident here, actually. What's going on here? Yeah, that's better. But yeah, for the face, I need one that looks down. Let's just squash the head a little. And the eyes. Now I have up, down, left, and right. For these other values, you have I, X, and Y. So I'll get rid of, do I have any animation values set to that? Oh yeah, I did, didn't I? Oh well. So for the eyes moving up and down, again, just make another warp deformer, or just set it to something. Make keyframes for this. And yeah, it's just a slow process of adding keyframes for every single one. Up, down, left, right. You can do the corners manually if you want, or try to synthesize the corners. And now I can, look in. Now the eyes go in all 8 directions. So for these ears, I already have two parameters set on this actually, don't I? So that makes things a little bit difficult. But yeah, I think I need to redo that. So for the most complicated animations, you should be setting the base layer here to the one that has the most complicated movement, because that way you can manipulate the mesh directly based on the most complicated movement. For simplified movements such as looking left to right and rotating what is essentially a sphere, you should be using warp deformers, because it's pretty easy to just deform this as if it were a sphere, if it were just like that. But for more complicated movements, you should be trying to save the mesh, and you should be trying to save the keyforms on something that's complicated. So looking left and right, usually that's not really the right idea. So let's delete these and group them together. And then do the whole left-right thing for that. Look down. Look up. Make the corners. Looks decent enough. We'll just re-synthesize the corners since I did that mistake. And the most complicated thing here will probably be making floppy ears. And for that, let's just put this on the hair move to side parameter here. So let's just make some keyframes there. And for this, it'll just swing left and right. And this requires a lot of fine mesh deformation. If it's a fixed shape like that though, there is another thing here, which is the form path. And you essentially just draw a path. And then when you click back to your mouse, this will have a huge sphere of influence where it just moves everything like that. And this is honestly the closest thing to a bone system in 3D animation. If you want something more rigid, you can have rotation deformers. So if you wanted to stick a rotation deformer on top of this, put that on the Z angle, and with this I can just rotate the whole thing. Put that under there. And the closest thing to bones is to actually just stack these rotations on top of each other. So there's a tool here as well, where you just keep doing rotation deformers on top of each other constantly. But I don't really like that method because it just adds lots and lots of animation layers on top. But it is one way if you want to do like a chain link or something like that, and you need to have individual spikes for chains. In this character's case though, I'm just going to straight up just deform the ears with this path. So on that frame, then it's flopping to the other side, move like that. Do something like that as well. And now it's a wiggly cat ear thing. Jeez, that looks so dumb. That's what you get for improvising. Let's have that look left to right as well. If this has the wrong origin point, you can actually just make a... Oh, that is really very much the wrong rotation, isn't it? You can just make a deformer without any child, so you set child parent manually, and then you can assign the position wherever you want. Let's say here I want to rotate at the base of the neck, and then I drag these into the hierarchy. So I just put that in there. And now the rotation point is at the neck. If you want physics, so that's essentially the entire character done. really roughly made in like 20 minutes. I forgot about the mouth, didn't I? So for the mouth, this doesn't have any parameters set to it. So let's see here. Where's the mouth? Mouth open. So here I'd want a fairly complicated mesh where I would kind of start pushing the mouth closed. But I'd also want to eventually fade it away into the closed mouth, which is there. So that's the open state. So for the closed state, I'll kind of just start pushing it in to close. And I'm doing this really quickly, so obviously it's quite rough, but yeah, I'll start like pushing it. But in order to make it look clean, you'd probably want to add a keyframe like here somewhere with that button, and then you start fading it out. So you just set the opacity to 0. And then you have a moving mouth like that. That's really messy looking. You can also set draw orders as well as blend mode, but yeah, I'm starting to get tired of talking now. I've been going at this for an hour and trying to cover all the steps. If you want physics, there is a menu here. Open physics scene blending settings. And you can start adding some physics settings. There's a breathing setting here which automatically goes up and down. So if you want something that constantly swings back side to side, you can have that. Or you can have this swaying thing as well. And the key here, and the way this works, is that it essentially just wobbles one of these values based on the input of another value. There's some presets here, so you can have, like, say, head input, and a physics preset. Put a name there. It'll take the input of some of these values, and then it'll output to a certain value. So you need to add an output value here. Let's set that to that, and then once that moves, this value will wobble like crazy. And that's how you add physics. So you still need to make keyforms. But it needs to be. It should ideally be a separate value where you can just let that parameter wobble. Yeah. So I have jiggle physics now. Yay. There's lots of parameters here on how strong the effect is and stuff like that. This screen, though, the physics screen, is also a good way to test out your model, because if you just click here, it just looks up and down, it just moves all the values as well. And there's also mouth open and close. Wow, that actually looks really bad. Let's fix that actually. Let's just scale up the entire thing. Yeah, that's a bit complicated for me actually. After you're done with all of this, it's a little bit backwards again, where you have to do a UV map. And that's done with... What is up with the traffic outside? That pretty much just ruined this entire recording, didn't it? Yay. And you do that by pressing this here. Yay. In the free version, there's a limit to how high you can make your textures. And you can only have one texture for a model file, but this is usually enough. And here, again, it's kind of reversed, isn't it? You made the texture and then the mesh, and now you're making the UV map. But the workflow is just better, I suppose. For in this case, while in normal 3D animation, you make the mesh and then the UV map and then you put the texture. But here you are doing the texture atlas now, and you can arrange this however you want. It's the UV map of the 3D model. Hopefully you can, arrange it as large as possible and with as minimal space as possible. If you've added new textures or something like that, they'll show up here, and then you need to actually put them in, and then you save the atlas. And that's pretty much the entire thing done really quickly. Let's save this. Let's save that just as a demo file. Yep. And then I export it for runtime. Extra settings here, so on and so forth. And then you end up with a bunch of files, a texture folder and stuff like that. But after that, well, all you have to do is load it up into your design program. So let's open up the control panel now for this particular program that I'm using. And I just need to load it in. So let's just do that. Just pick the right JSON file. Double click on that. And yeah, now I'm like a cat. Yay. So depending on the program, geez, I'm like a ghost cat, aren't I? It's kind of weird. Yeah. So there are a lot more parameters that you can do, such as eyebrows and stuff like that. And well, it looks like I have the eyebrows inverted, don't I? Oh well, that's fine, but you get the idea. There's also angle parameters if you really want. There's also form, which is supposed to be angry and nice eyebrows. There's mouth form, which is for smiling and frowning. Body is, so the angle X, Y, and Z, that's for the head. And body is if you want the body to move separately. Depending on how you do things, you may want to just assign body movement to the head as well, and that's just a limitation of the VTuber capture. It's just capturing your face, not your body. And then there is, of course, breathing, which is just an idle animation. So if I, for example, add another warp deformer on top of this, add a breathing parameter on top of it, and essentially just move the body up and down a bit, then it'll just cycle up and down. For the eyebrows, let's add another deformer on top of that, just so the animation parameters don't conflict. Add angle. Then I can, tilt this if I really wanted to. Free version, it says there's a max number of 50. That's way more than enough. You can see how many I've actually used in this really quick one. There we go. Just re-export it. Probably just reload the model. Let's see if that works. Yeah, depending on the program, I think I actually had the wrong one. I need to move these over the form. So just move that over the form. Form. Export. And yeah, so that is the really quick 1 hour explanation from start to finish, drawing something and putting something into Live 2D. I have no idea how useful that is because I'm making it up as I go. Although I do have a written version if that helps. Also, there were police sirens at a very, like, geez, yeah. Anyway, I suppose that's kind of it. Let me know if this seems useful, okay?